Right. All right. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So, my name's Travis Coan. I'm was part of what's formerly known as politics, and now is something bigger, SPA. I don't even know what all the things stand for. I've directed the Q-Step Center for many years, and so if you guys have heard of the Q-Step Center, but now with Chico and Ned and Tristan, I'm directing the Center for Climate Communication and Data Science. And so this talk is going to be about some of our work around trying to come up with various approaches to classify contrarian claims with respect to climate change, so climate skepticism and misinformation. So this is what we're going to do today. Hopefully that's okay. I'm going to talk about kind of the project more generally and kind of where we're going and what we've done instead of kind of a single sort of paper, but I'm happy to get into details whenever you guys want. And definitely just like interrupt me if you guys want to. I don't mind. Cool. All right, so we're going to talk about cards, okay, and cards 2.0. But before we talk about cards 2.0, we need to talk about cards 1.0 and even what the hell cards is, right? So CARD stands for what we're calling computer-assisted recognition of denial and skepticism. So, like I was saying, like it was cats for a while, and then I don't remember what we did with like why it was cats, but we ended up going with cards because I don't know, cats didn't provide the right, strength, didn't suggest the right strength. So yeah, we went with cards instead. And so this project, so like the story of cards actually begins like in 2015, so a long time ago, back when life was simpler, right? So like UK was still in the European Union, right? Corona was just a beer, like we could go on and on with, and back then there were a couple of really naive computational social scientists, and that would be me and Constantine at Trinity, and one cognitive psychologist, so John Cook, who wanted to get together to see if we could come up with a system to help organizations that were working on the ground at the time to try and monitor very specific actors in the climate change space. So, and again, so the whole sort of project was really based on trying to classify very specific claims for a finite set of actors that are kind of known skeptics, okay? And so these groups, because what they were doing on the ground is they were, at the time, they had sort of a team, an army of researchers on the ground that were going out to various blogs, social media platforms, and trying to respond to climate change misinformation in real time. And obviously that's laborious, and so this was our sort of first attempt at trying to get something that works for them. Okay, so that was the real motivation, and the real motivation was very much practical. Like, how can we do something for these groups so that it will help them in some way, right? So that's kind of where we focused. So we started, right, by basically building a taxonomy, and I won't go into like the details, and you guys probably don't care so much about the details, but the first thing we realized when trying to do this was basically that there wasn't a really good single sort of taxonomy for what sort of climate skeptic claims are out there. And so there was lots of different pieces of work around what skepticism means, so trend skepticism, various sort of pieces of the puzzle, but there wasn't kind of one place, and certainly nothing that would like fall into the category of sort of rigorously developed. And so unfortunately, like we had to start there. And not only that, our colleague, so John Cook at the time, he's a psychologist that's very interested in debunking sort of misinformation, so that's really where he's coming from. And he was quite clear that the sort of claims that we were detecting needed to be detailed enough to be suitable for those sorts of debunkings. And so it was actually really difficult. We didn't want to kind of do all this, but we kind of were forced down that path by sort of what John had in mind. You see, so it's very difficult. And so this is sort of where we started, and actually this is like was probably the hardest part. And so what we did is we went to the past literature, grabbed sort of all the claims that were sort of out there, and then we just went through and read literally thousands of contrarian paragraphs. So from blogs, from key sort of conservative think tanks. That's where most of this sort of skepticism is sort of coming from. So conservative think tanks, typically in North America, but there are sorts of arguments spread around the world. And so we did that and just rinsed and repeated until we got what we thought was bordering on a sort of comprehensive taxonomy at the time. Okay, so that's what we did there.
All right, good.
Yep.
That's very fascinating. Any idea how these could be done, not by hand?
Yeah, so we have, we're working on that a little bit. Yeah, so with the sort of GPT sort of revolution, yeah, I mean, we've gone through, and one project we're working on is trying to basically replicate this taxonomy via GPT-4. So, and it's shockingly good. It's really good at sort of pulling out arguments that are very we would call traditional sort of scientific skepticism, right? So it gets sort of our first category, so global warming's not happening. So this is like sea levels aren't rising, glaciers aren't melting, and people really do say, or extreme weather, it's not caused by climate change, or it's not due in part to climate change. And so it gets those things very well. Where it starts to fall down is, at least for us, is certainly on the solutions side. So, and that's harder for humans as well. So it's not surprised. It's not all that surprising that GPT-4 is having a difficult time with that. And then also sort of with the more ad hominem sort of attacks that are really, so this is like, Michael Mann is a poopy face. Like, it's like, there's no real, it's like, great. And so, yeah, it's struggling there. But yeah, we are, I mean, the early sort of results suggest that you can get a long way, at least to start, by, just prompting GPT-4. Yeah, so it'd be cool to see it in other contexts, yep.
So, to have, of these all claims are things that are facts, right? So do you have like a fourth dimension then that you say, oh, this is something that is a fact. Another one is not a fact. Scientists are biased. I think they're biased. I mean, we are biased, right?
Yeah, sorry. So if these labels, we had to get labels on this that could kind of fit on that sort of, this sort of space. But it's not scientists are biased. Scientists are biased. It's using, say, very specific arguments or claims that are kind of mapped out in the full paper on the ways in which climate scientists are perceived to be biased.
Biased opinion that scientists are biased.
What's up?
So you were saying that could be biased opinion that scientists are biased. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And so we don't actually, like, for this, and for what we're trying to do, we're not actually, and we're very clear, we're not actually looking at the veracity of these sorts of claims. Like, that's not what we're trying to do. And there are, I can point out ones in here that I agree with, right? I'm not a contrarian, but these are claims that contrarians make, right? So for instance, carbon sequestration sort of technology isn't up to snuff. I agree. Nuclear technology is potentially a good option. I agree.
It's more like if they're bad faith arguments, right? So they could be used in like a good faith setting, but most of this is trying to get the bad faith things worth.
And it's real, but like you're bringing up though a more fundamental challenge of like that, and because often they'll use the dog whistle, they'll use all sorts of strategies to actually make it look like I'm just an innocuous, I'm just saying, I mean, all science is biased. We all bring our own biases into it. That doesn't then mean that you can't trust, right, to any sort of order of magnitude, anything that's coming out of the IPCC, and therefore that climate change isn't happening, right? Those are two very different things, yeah. But good question, yep.
This might be a slightly rude question.
That's fine.
But before you were, the whole basis for doing this project was that you had some people who had some researchers who were going and trying to convince people otherwise of their was it try to counter argue them on the internet? I was just curious as to, did any of that work? Were they successful in their counter arguments?
Yeah, so I don't know. Actually, yeah.
I mean, people have.
No.
I mean, I think it's got worse, but
No.
People seem very stubborn.
Well, yeah, no,
on
and
the
this is,
internet, right?
well, this is the whole argument, like, yeah, sort of motivated reasoning, right? That people actually respond on the opposite way once you try to say, no, you're wrong. And I just saw a study come out, it was just like this week, right, about even debunking, right, and pre-bunking. That's basically suggesting that it's very hard to change people's opinions. So we would have to ask the friends of the earth, like, to see whether they think they're having any sort of traction. But yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah. I mean, I think where you would hope that it would have an impact, and this wasn't our initial sort of use case, is on that sort of middle ground, right? So it's those actors that are not necessarily on board with sort of a skeptical sort of viewpoint, that are still sort of trying to grapple with some of these claims, and that's where it could potentially be useful.
So you're trying to provide a counter voice to the misinformation, but not deal with the people that are giving the misinformation.
Yeah, so this, like, on our side, we kind of stop at the, here you go, John, like, I've given you, and not even like this is for sure it, right? But there's a high probability that this tweet has this claim in it. You go and do a computer assisted, and these are the ones you should really focus on. Yeah, so that's the sort of idea. Yeah, it's good. Cool. I thought the taxonomy slide, you guys would be super bored with that. Yeah, but that's fantastic. Cool. Yeah. So. So we were feeling good, right? So we did this taxonomy, and we're like, okay, that was and it was challenging. We started in 2015. Years of our life was trying to get this right, and use itself, it's not.
So just keep going on this thing. So that's very meaningful. But did you guys map, like, for instance, tweets onto this, like where most tweets fit in? Because I think that's almost like a label classification.
Yeah.
Most of tweets are fitting.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so you preempted the sort of the very next thing we did after building a taxonomy was annotate a ton of paragraphs along this taxonomy for the groups that we were interested in. Again, we were because our task was within sort of known skeptics, that's where we focused. And I'll talk more about some of the problems that's caused for us down the road and what we're doing to do it. But yeah, the next thing we did was we tried to annotate. And so we annotated actually a ton. And if I was to do this again, I'd do it all differently. And I could talk more about and the ways in which we're actually building sort of alternative benchmark data sets in different ways. But this is what we did for cards. So we recruited sort of 19 climate literate coders, and that's a really important point, okay? Because we tried to do it with Turk, we tried to do it with students, we tried to do it with lots of different people. It doesn't work because it's very difficult, actually. And so this is something to keep in mind when you see like stance detection for climate change in the computer science literature. Think about how they got that data and start to ask questions, because it's hard. And depending on what we're trying to classify, it's hard. So at this level of detail, when we're talking about specific claims, it's very, very difficult. So we had to have sort of climate literate coders, which John Cook runs a famous website called Skeptical Science. It's like very popular. And so he has a pretty wide network of sort of climate literate people. So we were able to get folks coded a ton, and did a bunch that we thought, like, to try and get at quality. So like multiple annotators per item, gold standard sort of annotations that we were comparing against. So we thought we tried to do the best we could, I think, on that front. And we paid people with a t-shirt. So that's why So but keep that in mind. I mean, these are kind of activists that are 19, right? They're doing this because they believe in the cause. And whether that adds bias to this is something that is very much, in scope, right? So, but it certainly wasn't any worse than a Turker. And it was actually way worse, okay? But yeah. So, great. So now we have our sort of annotations, and okay, now we're going, right? So now we get to the sort of classify. So how are we we have this, and we can already say some interesting things because we have a big enough sample, and we've gone through this sort of rigorously in terms of quantitative content analysis, like we'd usually do in the sort of social sciences, where we can say something meaningful, but we want to build a model, right? Because that's the idea. And so what we ended up doing is we said, okay, well, what level can we get to based on the sort of support we have in the data? And it was really clear, basically at this, what we would call the subclaim level is kind of where we should stop. We do have annotations on all of these things, it's just some of them are really spotty, okay? So we stopped there, we still sort of like 20 some odd sort of classes, okay? One thing that I'll say to you, so that we train a multi-class classifier, and this will come back in the future, is that in order to, at the time, we thought in order to make life easier for our coders, that we would just have them code a single class. So there's multiple classes, but one class per item, per paragraph, right? Instead of multi-label, we all know what that means. I forget where I am at sometimes. Like, yeah. So but I'll come back to that, okay? Because that turned out to be a very strong assumption, okay? But that's sort of what we did. I'll kind of quickly go through, and then we can get to some of the. Or do you have questions?
So those paragraphs were crafted or extracted from?
Extracted, yeah. So basically what we had is we went out and we actually collected a ton. So we collected the top 20 conservative think tanks, which is where all these arguments are coming from generally, and then the top 35 climate skeptic blogs at the time, which were popular back in 2015, not so popular anymore. And we grabbed basically all their information, anything we can get on them from 1998 to 2020. So that's the kind of range, knowing that you have, as you go back in time, there's attrition for sure. But yeah, one interesting thing about climate change misinformation is when you look at the actual claim, not a lot actually changes in terms of the claim. It's slightly different wording around it, slightly different sort of framing or context, but actually it's the sort of basic claims that we're seeing now, we're seeing during COP right now, are the same claims we saw during Kyoto, give or take. Yeah. So that's to answer that. So these are, pulled them in, this sort of people annotated them along all of these dimensions. We restricted just to the sort of subclaim level in order to train a sort of model, okay?
Sorry, did you have to filter the known claim? I mean, things that cannot be classified here.
So that's a good point. Sorry, this is really good. So we want those to stay in, actually, even for us. So even within our set, we want to be able to say when there's a claim and when there's not a claim. So so the zeros are in, like so that would be another sort of, so you would have no claim plus all of these claims. And it's highly imbalanced. And so, so the zeros are the dominant class by, just the way in which the English language works. This is all English language too, I should say that. So we have a huge class imbalance problem, and that was I can talk about all the ways in which
It's about those. I mean, their distribution. Some claims are going to be super popular, others.
And for sure. And so I should have had all the summary data out there, but there are like so. Extreme weather sort of claims very very common. It's natural, so weather's always climate's always changed. Natural variation very very common. So overall, sort of impacts won't be bad, or it's plant food, not as common. So there is. It's not. We're not talking about it being evenly distributed across class. Good. Okay. So that's we did that. Then we this is just some of what we started to fit. Like that's like the whole. I think this is like the history of like text classification from 2015 to right before Da Vinci came out. It's in this table because it's like starting from very simple discriminative sort of models all the way till we get to sort of a Roberta really does most of the work, and then a Roberta logistic ensemble gets that's kind of okay. But we got to this point and we're thinking, okay, that's okay. I mean, for us, that's actually this is in range with what we would hope. Again, this is overall sort of, this is what do we have? Precision recall in F1. This would be macro F1, because we are actually interested in our different classes. And this is kind of where we get, like, another thing to point out is that we have what we call a noisy sort of validation set. We also took a lot of time to annotate a representative, what we were calling noise-free test set, because even within our super, I would think is about as good of coders as we could get, it was noisy, right? So like this is not, it's a very noisy sort of classification problem. So that's the reality for almost everything we work on. But so that's that, and then we were like, by that point, we're feeling okay. Yeah, we're good.
Did that include the zero class?
So this does, but it's macro averaged. Yeah, so that's not going to be driving. If we did the micro average version of F1, it would be through the roof good. But this is macro average. Yeah, good. Great. So we're pretty happy by this point, right? Model performs really well for some classes, right, and not as great for other classes. Particularly policy, it has a hard time with. Okay, again, because human beings have a hard time with policy. Next thing, obviously, you're going to do is use it in an academic paper, so that's what we did, right? And this is getting at your sort of, did you look at how it varies across? And so we did within the context of conservative think tanks and blogs, which actually are a decent representation of the sort of claims you're seeing on social media sort of stuff as well. So we can kind of look at the overall dynamics, right? So we can see sort of solutions, sort of narratives are on the rise. So things sort of attacking solutions. This is also the class we're not as the most confident in. So it's probably, if we were to draw some error bands around this, it would get pretty wide, but that's okay. Great. Okay. So we got to this point. We're thinking, okay, we're really good now. Now we're going to go back to what we actually wanted to do in the first place and build an app that helps people on the ground monitor this stuff. And so that's what we did. And this is what they wanted. They wanted a sort of email notification system. I don't know why that looked like this. And so we did that, right? And we thought, okay, yeah, fantastic. We're good. Like, mission accomplished. Like, we did it, right? And then we stopped and thought and said, oh shit, no, not mission accomplished. Because once we sort of deployed this in the real world, we learned, here are all the ways it needed to be different, right? I'm sure you guys all have your own story of this. So basically, a couple of things, right? One is that the taxonomy is not perfect. We knew that going into it, right? And so we've taken sort of steps to try and improve the taxonomy, particularly around policy. I'm not going to go too much into that. Challenge 2, the model we were having a really hard time generalizing to tweets, okay? And we didn't really design it around that, actually. It was very much for conservative think tanks and blogs at the time, and it does very good on that. But when we tried to deploy it in another sort of domain, we realized that there were some sort of systematic issues. And one important one being that, and this comes back to that sort of multi-class decision, that most tweets are actually multi-label. So what we would get is we would use it and it would give one of the 3 claims that are in there, and we would get that pretty much bang on, but we would miss the other 2. And it's because people are jamming lots of information in a tweet, right? And so there's a disconnect between sort of what we wanted to do and what we were doing. And then the last and probably the most significant challenge is that people didn't want to use the model inside the pod. They didn't want to use it just for skeptics. They wanted to use it for anybody, right? And no matter how many times we told them that's not what we did, or what you should do, or the appropriate usage, people didn't care, okay? And so we thought, okay, we really got to fix this if anybody's going to use it, okay? So that's cards 1.0, and then cards 2.0 basically starts from here. And so this is all the things that we're trying to do in order to try and improve this system, okay? It's now not just me, Constantine, and John. It's like a bunch of people. Ned, I put you on here. Chico probably should have been on here, but I don't know. Yeah, I'm just making it up. But no, so now there's sorts of three principal teams across the world that are sort of doing various things within this sort of taxonomy and this sort of space. So us here and the sort of new center, what I'm calling the Monash or Australia team, which is John's sort of side of it, and then there's a group of scholars in the U.S. at Brown that are working very hard on looking at these arguments within a policy context. And so not in anything, but in congressional transcripts, in congressional testimonies, those sorts of things. They're very much interested in the U.S., but that could be generalized. Right? So that's that. Yeah, because I feel like I'm not going to leave. How long do people usually go?
You can
Just whatever I want. Okay, cool. All right. Well, we'll get. Yeah. So I won't go. Yeah. So that's kind of where we're at now. So improving the taxonomy, though, you guys were actually really interested in it. so we could stay here. But I'm actually not the right person to even talk about this because this is really Miriam Nanko, my PhD student's work. So we should have brought her if we were really interested in the taxonomy. But basically, what she's done. So this is just the solutions claim. And you can see it's actually expanded. It's more now because it's really hard. And she's basically what she's done is she's taken our claims and she's mapped them on to Timmons. So one of the guys from Brown came up with something called the discourses of delay. I don't know if people have heard about that, but this is kind of like that. But their discourses are very nebulous. They're not kind of like our claims. And so one feature of this is Miriam spends a lot of time and effort trying to map their sort of discourses of delay onto our sort of claims, kind of combine the two frameworks. So for people that study this, I think it's actually a really good thing. But you see, policies really, it's just really difficult. This is going to continue to be difficult. And unfortunately, this is where the conversation's going. So there's a lot of challenge here. Yeah. But I think we're doing a bit better here. Okay. So that's sort of challenge one, getting the taxonomy.
Regarding taxonomy, from the title, like when you say contrarian claims.
Sorry, yeah, I'm using jargon.
What's the difference between like misinformation, fake news, or any other of these?
Yes, I like to use contrarians to talk about climate contrarians. So sometimes they're called skeptics, sometimes they're called misinformers, or like worst case deniers, which I don't like that at all, really. John likes to use the deniers a lot. I don't like it. Yeah.
Contrarian's a good one.
Contrarian's good, yeah, because it's basically they are kind of specifying claims that are contrary to our sort of best understanding of science, or in many times policy as well. So that's what I'm using for contrarians, yeah. And that's not to say that it's, so within this taxonomy, within our taxonomy, there are clear instances of misinformation, like climate change isn't happening, or it's natural variability, or because these things have been demonstrated to be within any sort of reasonable doubt, wrong, yeah.
Contrarian also captures how some of these actors talk about other issues as well. So, like, I like the contrarian to quite a lot of progressive policy, of which climate change is one, and then there's other issues that tend to sort of...
Yeah, I should have defined that, though. Sorry, I'm like going between audiences, and I'm just confused. Yeah. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Okay. Good. So that's like, yeah. Go ahead.
Are these all meant to be refutable, or are they just a label of what people are trying to argue?
They're just claims. Yeah. So
I mean, some of like policy increases costs.
It does.
Often they do.
No. It does. And so yes. So yes, absolutely. So where this would be coded, though, policy increases cost, therefore we shouldn't do anything about climate change. Okay. Would be that we kind of just knocked off all the therefore we shouldn't do anything about climate change just for the purposes of the figure. But that's what so and even within the context of climate change, that's a correct statement. That's not a false statement. It will raise costs, right? So that's why there are some claims that are misinformation. There are some that are not, right? You could ask yourself, well, does that mean that we should then not do anything? And then I would suggest that is sort of misinformation because it's going against, or it's at least contrary, right, to our sort of best knowledge of what we need to do policy-wise. But good point.
So how did you proceed here? So you say you address gaps in the taxonomy. So is it that one statement fails not in one exactly, but in multiple? You have to create a new category, or how do you say something is wrong in your previous taxonomy?
Yeah, so she actually did. Let's see. Yeah, so this is, she did actually separate sort of climate policies are unnecessary, like we don't even need them, from climate policy is too difficult. So she actually did add additional sort of sections onto the taxonomy. So though she did do it in a very smart way that it can still be mapped in between quite easily. And so, yeah, I don't know if that...
Why was it a necessity to refine, to multiply categories?
Yeah, so both to refine, to make it more so easier to sort of code along, she kind of started to look at Congress, started to look at policy debates and realized that they're using slightly different sort of sets of arguments, fundamentally sets of different arguments, if that makes sense. Yeah. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but yeah.
I'm trying to think in a sort of systematic way. So,
Yeah.
if you have a confusion table and certain arguments are always mixed and matched into different categories, then perhaps you should have another category, or you have to split some of the categories.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so some of these categories, yeah, it was difficult to assign, to one of what we would call our super claims or subclaims. And so in those cases, she thought really like hard about, does something else need to be added to the taxonomy, and then did, if it was necessary. Yeah, she also reorganized a bit in order to keep it consistent with this discourses of delay, which again is really like popular and kind of like taken off in the sort of policy area. So yeah.
That's informed at the annotation level, or is that informed at the how good?
At the annotation level.
At the annotation
and then
level, yeah.
and then it like in the future. So we actually have annotated along the taxonomy, but we haven't gone down and actually tried to fit models at this level yet.
So I think that's answering the question is like, is that the qualitative level that?
Right. It's not a machine errors that
Yeah,
inform.
No. Yeah,
It's
no.
at the qualitative level, yeah.
Yeah.
Because some of the claims, like, you need to see at the qualitative level to understand, to actually train the model. Like, I don't know, it's that way around, I think.
Yeah, this is based on quality. Yeah, this is based on how hard is it to annotate and what do we know about like how these things work. Yeah.
You have the inter-annotator disagreement.
Yes.
You want to look at that?
Yeah, we have all of that stuff. Yeah. We're good at that in social science. We've been doing that a lot longer than you guys have. Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah. Yeah. No, we got all that. So yeah. But yeah, so lots on the taxonomy. I love it. So this is actually the taxonomy has been the thing that's been most important about the whole project, and all the ways in which it's wrong has been really important too. Because like it's like people don't agree all the time with the way we've structured it as well. Right? And so yeah, this is difficult, but we think it's the best we can do. Yeah.
Is there, like, the idea here is already like hierarchical, you have like levels of levels, but is there a hierarchy in the way people use those claims? Like I start being denied by type 1, then eventually I see that there's no argument, then I move to type 2 and 3, and then finally, okay, now you can't beat me, I go for the policy one.
That's a really good question that I don't know the answer to. Like, this is something that we could start to look at though, right? Because if we have sort of a timeline of a particular user to see how they're switching across different arguments, you could potentially do that. I mean, one thing we see is a lot of a claim with also what we would call an ad hominem sort of attack, right? That it's like, it will be like, the climate's always changed. Therefore, these alarmist climate scientists can't be taken seriously. So it's always sort of like we see a lot sort of paired with these sorts of attacks sort of on scientists or key scientific bodies showing up with a lot of other things. But yeah, that's not quite what you're getting at. You're getting at how do people dynamically switch. That's a whole other thing.
At least pairs.
So,
Pairs of arguments. Well, first argument and then the next argument.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
pairs will give you lots of information.
Yeah, and so this is why a lot of what we're doing is going from multi-class to multi-label, because already you can start to see those pairs. It's like these always show these two are heavily correlated, and then I mean we can think about what then do we do on the modeling side to sort of pick up that sort of correlation in that sort of in the label set, which I would love to hear ideas. We haven't really thought about that too much at this point because we haven't really gone over and done a lot with the multi-label yet. But we have done the annotation, knowing that we're going to need to. Yeah. And this is the annotation. Here's the annotation, right? So we've been doing, like a lot of what we've been doing over the past couple of years is really trying to fill in with sort of like what we think are decent benchmarking data sets. So we have one on tweets. Unfortunately, now there's no, I can't study Twitter very easily anymore. So I might have to do that or ask ChatGPT to write it as a Facebook post or something. I don't know. But so we have an expert sort of annotated set of tweets. This is all sort of multi-label. The team at Brown and a bit here at Exeter have added sort of congressional testimonies. So these are U.S. sort of congressional testimonies. And then we have some ongoing work on YouTube that we're trying to do and TikTok to try and get just additional sort of multi-label benchmark data sets that people could use because that's often what we're asked for. And so we're trying to produce it. We built an app to do it. And again, like this is why I don't think we would code 26,000 anymore. I think we would be very nimble. The app basically, it follows, so it sort of does some model-assisted labeling or pre-annotation. And then it also has an active learning sort of loop in there that we haven't actually really used. We've just implemented. But that's kind of where we're going with the annotation. And the idea is just to make it really easy to annotate along this sort of taxonomy if you wanted to. So we've done that. And then we've kind of really quickly started to get at sort of this third challenge, which is being able to classify out of the box. So this is not within sort of known skeptics, but this is within just I give you a tweet and you can tell me whether it has one of these contrarian claims in it or not. Okay, not the specific claim, because right now we're just really thinking about it in terms of this binary sort of classification, so sort of contrarian or not contrarian at this point, but. Yeah, that's it. So this is one paper by the Australia team led by Christian that basically just trains a model like a binary classifier on top of the sort of traditional multi-class cards data and find for tweets in particular and find it does much better than if you just were to run cards on it, which is not surprising, and it's kind of what we've sort of found. So one version of sort of the BERT family gets 82%, or so F182 for the binary. But what I want to show you though is so since this bit we've taken it and added a little bit. So we've added annotations that we had around last year's COP, so Conference of Parties. Again, multi-label tweets and. This is what we're getting now. So we're able to like really sort of easily beat the Rojas benchmark, like just using sort of Roberta base. And we've optimized the Roberta base, but we haven't done Roberta large, we haven't done anything else. And there's no active learning component in this, right? So I would imagine you could get that up even higher. This is the stuff that everybody keeps asking us for, so I'll put it in there, right? Is that the next, so I'll explain this a little bit more. So we have the two sort of GPT-4 varieties. One is what we call dynamic few-shot learning, and so how that works is it's really simple, but it's turned out to be really, really effective, and it's kind of taking off, at least in the blogosphere, even though we've been doing it for a long, long time, is effectively what you do is when you're sending sort of few-shot examples to the prompt, you're going to have a set of examples if you're sending few-shot examples to the prompt. It basically uses the prompt and finds the most similar few-shot examples to that prompt. And so all it's doing is it's saying, I don't care about the whole context, I just care about this particular part of the context. Yeah? And so instead of, and we just find that if do it that little easy, I mean, super easy, right? Just saying, instead of any 4, just give me these 4. And find that, yeah, it tends to do really good. Here on GPT-4, it doesn't do much. Because GPT-4's got, we don't know how many billions of parameters. It's not, people like estimate about 500 billion, but I don't know, right? So, but out of the box, GPT-4, right, 0 shot, 83, F1 83, that's gnarly. I think that's amazing to me. I look at this and go, oh my God, I can't believe this. Like when I started 11 years ago, or whatever, I would have never dreamed. Yeah, so unbelievable. The problem though, right, GPT-4, still not scalable because we can't afford it and the latency is horrible. So interesting for a benchmark, but not very practical, right? And still doesn't get on the sort of Roberta. Okay, so then we started to try and get more practical, right? So GPT 3.5 Turbo, so this is ChatGPT, right? Not as good, but not like horrible either, right? And if we're thinking about these models as a pre-annotator, right, or something that's going to help you to label, right, it starts to become really both scalable and useful, right? Because we cut out a lot of garbage right before we even get started, yeah. And then just for like, giggles, right? Like I just took I guess one of the better right now open source LLMs, right? So this is Zephyr, and just took the 7 billion parameter model. Okay, so we have like what we think is 500 billion, we have 140 billion, and we have 7 billion, right? And we see, yeah, 0 shot, it's a tiny model. It doesn't do as well. Though even 68 is not crazy. Dynamic few shot cleverly add dynamic context. And it gets right up to about basically GPT level, right? At least 0 shot should be GPT level. Yep.
Why are you not downloading the 7 billion parameter models and then fine tuning them? Or is that what you're getting onto?
No. We're just prompting right now. Yeah. And this is what we can do. This is what we can do next. Yeah, exactly. So the plan is basically to take these and actually take the quantize sort of 30 billion parameter versions, and then do sort of parameter efficient sort of fine tuning sort of stuff to see if we can get any better. Though, like, to be honest, I don't know if you have different experiences than I do. Like, I find actually like it's really hard not to overfit. Like for these, I found actually like dynamic few shot prompting gets me basically what I'm getting when I'm fine tuning. And I don't have to come up with a bunch of fine-tuning labels to fine-tune. I just need to come up with one really nicely curated set of potential prompts. So that's, yeah, and so if people start to show me that something different, I'll listen, but like, yeah, we've been really surprised. And sometimes it makes, like for us, when we've fine-tuned, it's made it worse. Yeah. So, yeah, I'd be curious, yeah, like, if that's kind of if you're not seeing that, then maybe we're doing something wrong. Yeah, but that's sort of down the pipe now. So yeah, I feel like I want to leave time, although you guys have been asking questions the whole time. So yeah, any other? Okay. So we've also, the Brown team has started on Congress as well. So this is Inhofe, right? I don't know if you guys know. So he was on floor of the Senate saying it's cold in Washington, D.C., therefore climate change isn't happening. So like, yeah, he's like the king D-bag of the Senate. I don't know if that's his actual title, but like it's something like that. Yeah, the Brown team is kind of working here. They're finding actually some really promising sort of initial results too. Again, a lot of this is sort of Roberta at this point. But yeah, I mean, it's orders of magnitude worse than tweets, but like it's totally dominated by policy content, and policy content's really, really difficult. And so it's not surprising that it's going to be a little lower, but it's interesting sort of preliminary results. Okay. And then the multi-label sort of stuff is just a work in progress. So if and when we get to that, and if you guys have ideas of what we should be doing, what we should be thinking about, then I'm happy to hear them. And then, yeah, I think that's basically it for us. Yeah, I think we've learned a lot about what to do, what not to do, and I think we're making some progress towards various sorts of challenges, but there's still lots of work to do.
So I'm very curious about the part of automating the taxonomy, because people come from a certain set of values and a certain set of beliefs. So I'm sure that with a well enough trained model, you could generate some potential parts of the taxonomy. Like if people think that, for instance, the environment is a pure thing that shouldn't be interfered with, maybe you could propose that, maybe that will be, division 5.4.3.2. I can see how that could be done, and of course that doesn't mean it'll actually exist. So there's this kind of mismatch between the space of all potential claims and the ones that actually happen.
Yeah.
There have been people trying to do a similar mapping, but with a worse problem, with trying to map all opinions ever of the world. It's a project I spoke to the creator at some point. He literally created a platform where people can propose questions such as, or statements such as, everyone's rights are equally important, and then folks can vote on whether they agree or not. And then even provide arguments, pro and con, because their goal is to map out all the arguments for all the things ever. Basically, that and some coffee, and that's it. And in this case, there's no AI, they're just trying to map things out, not sure what for. It doesn't seem like they have a big purpose. Here, obviously, you have a purpose. So, I guess, can you just speak more about how much you think is even possible to automate some of that stuff? In this guy's case, different story, because then the topic is not even set. Here you've got a more well-defined thing, but it makes me wonder, if I wanted to do this in 2030, is it going to be basically the same? Would I have to annotate everything again? Could I somehow, train a model on this to then infer how people will respond to, let's say, the threats of the new thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in there to unpack. Yeah, I mean, I think the extent to which some of these claims and show up in sort of the model's general knowledge, it does do a good job at saying. I mean, if you ask it, and we probably should have done that in real time, to just ask GPT, give me all the arguments for climate skepticism, right? Or give me all the versions of climate misinformation, and it will bang, 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 bang. And when you do that, you'll see it starts to map very clearly. You still, I mean, even for us though, it takes we haven't gotten to the point where we don't have somebody that's an expert looking over that and saying, this is how it fits together. What you want to do is put it into some sort of taxonomy. There's some sort of hierarchy. So yeah, I mean, if it's just finding individual claims and just saying, give me all the versions, and then give me the same claim as Hunter S. Thompson, you know what I mean? I bet it will, yeah, but I don't know if that really answers your question.
Because I feel like if you wanted to map, to kind of generate a bunch of potential claims, behind the scenes you're making the model or the annotator think systemically.
Yeah.
If I'm thinking that rain makes things wet, now I'm connecting things, so if I'm worried about wetness, I'm worried about rain. So any trained model would kind of have to pick up on connections between things.
Yeah.
For people to do it, then you're raising the question of whether people think systemically or whether they're just repeating whatever the podcast said, right? So it kind of becomes a question of how do people think? There has been a little evidence that people from the United States specifically have been thinking more systemically over time, but then it's no longer a question for cards.
No, but it's really interesting. I mean, there's a whole study just on prompting different cultural contexts, and then asking for the same taxonomy and seeing how much it varies. It would be super interesting.
Yeah, because some cultures will be more okay with certain things than others.
Absolutely, yeah, and then it just gives insight also into what context means for these models, because we don't really understand. I mean, there's most of it we don't understand.
You can just ask GPT for give me some climate contrarian claims. You're not saying, according to whom, in what decade, I don't know.
Yeah, you're a Brazilian farmer, right? Give me some, or just, pretend, and if you do that, what does it do? Because maybe it's very different, yeah.
So, what was I going to ask? Oh yeah, Do you think that, so this is all like contrarian climate stuff, and then in my research I come across stuff that is counter to like the logic of what we should be doing about climate change. So like, for example, just purely free market fundamentalist claims that assume unlimited growth, which I assume aren't captured by this, and other ones like greenwash, right, from like fossil fuel companies. Like, do you think that we should be working on computational approaches to those claims? Is there anybody already working on this?
John,
Know about?
so John and Jeffrey Suprin, who formerly Harvard and now wherever in Florida, like they've basically come up or developed a cards-like taxonomy for greenwashing, and they're annotating a bunch of appropriate sort of documents for greenwashing along that taxonomy. I just literally before this, because of the stuff with CAD and COP, so CAD's like a bunch of activists that are doing stuff for COP right now, I emailed them to be like, where is that? Because like everybody's screaming for it.
That's the thing. So mine, I found that like, you know, I was looking for skeptic stuff and from the skeptic organisations that I collected, and it is like a lot of it's not even saying the contrarian claims. It's actually just making claims about what we should be doing with energy and why fossil fuels are so great and things like that. So it's all the stuff that's actively contributing towards discourse of delay, but isn't exactly misinformation.
I mean, so and actually, like this is the same sort of thing that Miriam comes up across. It's literally delay, but it's not wrong, right? So it is. It's like it's very difficult. But yes, so they're working very hard on greenwashing, and I think these sorts of things would fall more cleanly under that sort of umbrella of like claims. It's not quite card like this.
I think that answers some of the questions from people thinking about the claims. Like some are misinformation, some are not. You would agree with some of them, but like I guess the main thing to remember is that they're done in bad faith, and it's like the same thing as like Shell investing in 14 million into this university for kind of pro-environmental stuff, but like they're doing that to.
I mean, greenwashing by definition is it's contingent on the organization making the claim. And so it's definitely within. You're never going to go between with a sort of greenwashing sort of taxonomy. Yep.
So suppose in a few years someone comes and gives you this fantastic AI system that can do that. So you give a bunch of text, like a corpus of 1 million papers, and it says, okay, build a hierarchy, taxonomy for, and then you specify things, arguments or whatever. And then you have it. What do you do next? How you use it?
Yeah, it's good. So what would I do? So I would then take it and I would set up some model-assisted labeler where
Of course, then you also get the labeler that puts anything into this taxonomy. So what do you do with, now that you know, for any argument, you know where it fits in the taxonomy?
For any argument, I know where it fits in. I've been given all of the arguments.
Like assume it works.
Assume I have everything that I have. Assume that
and
it works.
it's working. Yeah,
It's working. So you can, for any topic, in fact, you can build the taxonomy automatically, and you can build the classifier into the taxonomy.
Oh, okay.
And you're given that. Now, what do you study?
So then I would start to bring in all the other covariates that we're actually interested in and see. So it'd be the question: how do people switch across arguments, right? How are people, are particular arguments correlated with the sort of funding that I get? So, for instance, in lobbying, right? So, do I specify certain arguments when I'm getting money from certain organizations? So, I think for me, if I'm actually able to measure these things, right, then I can start to really answer all the questions, all the sort of political science sort of questions or social science questions that I'm actually interested in. Yeah.
So I mean, I could per platform as well.
Well, platform. I mean, it's endless, right? Like, I mean, for me, it's always about influence because that's what we want to know. Like, which ones are getting the most pop? why, yeah, like, and who, is pushing those, so, but yeah.
The end goal is to counter misinformation, right? And
Yeah,
to
but
be
then
able to,
you can end up like having to develop the same thing for the other side to have better arguments to deny things.
yeah,
And then
that's a risk.
Yeah, in fact, I was thinking this you can apply to the old problem of religion versus atheism. You say, okay, give me all the arguments pro, contra, now you get people very excited.
Yeah, that sounds like a Chico project.
I mean, the opinion thing I mentioned is a bit like that.
Yeah,
like they're trying to map
yeah.
out all the arguments, but that's crowdsourced rather than having it in volunteers. But it's also like they don't do a taxonomy there. They just like have a random set of questions. But yeah, you could apply it to a context like that, and then you'll just end up with the same thing, just with a different topic.
Yeah, I mean, you're like you said, I think we were years off, like not for anything, right, but like for things where you can get a good corpus of sort of papers that, I mean, already you can kind of go get all of archive, and so if you buy what's going on there, you might be able to start to build something like this. Yeah, I do, I would have to, I think it's going to be iterative, though. It'd be iterative. It'd almost be like you develop some sort of chatbot where you're chatting with the papers that are bringing in and trying to make the taxonomy. But yeah, getting ahead of myself. Yep.
A lot of the questions seem to be about time in the claims, and I know you touched on most of them are pretty stable, and I'm sure as you go down the levels in the taxonomy, they'll be less stable. But have you considered how long these claims are likely to last? The reason I ask is with COVID, a lot of the conspiratorial claims have tied into the New World Order Great Reset angle, which might change the sub claim, but it's still science/policy is unreliable or biased or conspiring against you.
And that's basically, yeah. So I mean, I think, we get that question a lot. So like, oh, there's this new argument, and actually, if you go back and look, it just depends on how high up or down the taxonomy you're going. It's like actually not a new argument. It kind of fits within sort of what we've already had there, used in slightly different ways or slightly different sort of context or words. So in terms of stability, like, again, Tristan, like, it's been really stable. And I think that's one, but I think there's an important point here, and it's that's why it works really well for climate change. For things like, you go over to something like COVID, you go over to something that's more dynamic and is changing like that, then you would be constantly needing to update the sort of taxonomy and everything that comes along with it. It just so happens that climate change I think anti-vax stuff is like that too. It's just kind of in this, it's different shades of the same arguments, yeah.
And in fact, something like the atheism thing would fall like that too, because the arguments have been there for,
It's just different. Just a long time, turns out a long time. Yeah.
If you want to go meta, there's a new thing that's going to happen, which is the people that are pro or contra AI.
Right.
And so you can use AI to study.
Oh,
The people
that's,
that are
okay.
pro or contra AI, they will not like it, but you can still do it.
Are you making a claim about it? Is that it?
Huh?
Are you making a claim about it?
Well, no, the problem is people are going to say, AI is going to come for our works, for our jobs.
and tie together AI with atheism.
Yep.
The funniest thing there, though, is that, again, so the fact of technology taking over our jobs is not a new claim.
We're there.
Yeah. So,
It's harder with AI though because it's much more of an open debate, whereas with climate science we have like loads and loads and loads of evidence that climate change is happening.
But that's a bit biasing one of the two sides. You should be neutral there and say arguments in general. You don't say this is the correct arguments and these
Well,
are
no, with climate science you would say that. You would say that the contrarian claims are incorrect and are not based on science, whereas the dominant climate science is. I mean, from a scientific perspective, you have like actual scientific skepticism, and you have that. But broadly, if you look on on Twitter and you look at like the kind of general discourse around kind of mainstream accepted climate change is something that's happening. It's caused by it's accelerated by humans. We should do something about it. Versus people saying it's not. Then you have a very definite thing to look against. You can call one side misinformation. With AI, it's going to be a lot harder because there's all kinds of different angles.
And if you want one which is so hard that there's no truth, you can have the political spectrum. left and right, socialism and capitalism. So you have arguments for one, for the other, and there's no way to say one is right. And
Well,
one is
this
wrong.
maps onto that in a way, roughly as well.
No, well, only the question, what do
Yeah,
you say? Are you pro? Are you contra? Are you, arguments you're bringing for one topic or another? It's true. You have a spectrum, scientific or completely
I
opinion.
think on the scientific topics, I think on climate change and on vaccines as well, you're going to find that this you have that baseline to say against. You can say there's misinformation
Sure.
a lot easier than you could.
But I don't think it's a feature of this approach.
No, if you're thinking at, more generally, like what can the approach do? Yeah, absolutely. These are just claims. Yeah, we're thinking in terms of this issue, and then and for this issue and issues similar to it, yeah, it's gonna work. Should work pretty good. Yeah.
So let's assume you solve this problem.
I love this. I never get this question.
Because really, if you get a method that works, you need to be able to do something with the results. So if you're able to identify where all the bad faith arguments are, etc., are people working on the best ways
Yes.
to present the correct information to change people's minds?
Absolutely.
Those are two separate things, right?
Yeah.
Presenting correct information and change people's minds.
Yeah, but really the correct information is useless if it doesn't have any effect on someone, regardless of whether you're...
So you can change people's minds without
There's
presenting
no
the
point
correct
just being
information.
independent if no one
People are
listens. Right?
changing their mind with
It's the,
not correct
the mind
information.
changing.
This way, you have science. The field of science communication is like exploding now because a lot of the thing around this is like, okay, we have all this evidence about AGW, and yet it's graphs aren't going to convince anybody, or like is an alarmist take, world's going to win tomorrow. Is that going to convince people? So these are like the questions that are still. There's still so much research to be done on how to do that and how to communicate it best. And then there's all kinds of answers to that, right? Like immersive art experiences might be the best way to do this. Or, instead of,
Which actually cards has like been the basis for an immersive art experience. Yeah, this guy Gaetan from France.
So this
Yeah.
problem was concrete quite recently, wasn't it, with the vaccine? So how do you best present the information to convince and move people to take the vaccine?
Because
That
like
was-
facts and numbers, if just presented bluntly, don't don't
No.
acknowledge them.
No,
Whereas I go,
you need-
oh yeah, that's obvious. Come
Yeah.
on, let's go. Whereas the general public doesn't respond that well.
they need a good narrative.
Yeah,
It's
it's
compelling narrative.
really vibes based,
Yeah.
and that's
100%.
how do we
Yeah, that's why there's a lot of serious research
what
done
do
on
we do
that.
about it?
Yeah, there's time. Yeah. I mean,
I see lots of stuff. There's no disrespect. I see lots of stuff in this area where it's like we're identifying where the problem is, and I don't see much on how we're going to solve it now we've identified it. I know this is step one, but
I mean,
I think one
not to
reason is
sound
because
rude, but I think you're not probably not looking in the right because there's like
no, I'm sure I'm not.
Yeah.
The little CS space.
No, and this is very much the little CS space. Yeah, like there are whole teams. Like I'm just this week at Sanders sort of lab. Like it's all devoted to how do we respond. And so there are different. Yeah, like Chico said. Chico, you know more than I do on this stuff. Like actually, so yeah, there are different ways. So like whether it's pre-bunking or inoculation is the best. So people are testing various theories, and these things are happening at scale in real, or the organizations we're working with are deploying sort of methods.
Alpha beta testing interventions.
Yeah, exactly. Like with mobile apps at scale. Yeah, and trying to figure out what works best. But there's a whole literature, a longer literature than a lot of this, on what, like in psychology, mostly on how to do it.
How to change people's minds.
Yeah, it turns out it's difficult, which is why we do all this.
Luckily, also.
Yeah.
But also in politics and in the other departments in economics, they have entire sectors which are nudging. How do you...
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
that's
Nudge.
it, yeah. But nudge tends to be more about behavior, right?
Huh?
Nudge tends to be more about behavior than about changing someone's minds.
Well, that's the next thing. You think it's hard to change somebody's mind, try to change their behavior. And nudge, I don't know, man.
For certain things.
certain things it works, but like for this sort of stuff, but like behavior is really hard because you can convince somebody that this is happening, but then you go, okay, well,
Let's
now,
do something.
yeah, now you need to like get rid of the gas boiler, and they go,
Right.
yeah, or like, oh, there's an energy crisis, you know what I mean? So yeah,
It's easy to nudge someone to change their behavior on something that
right.
really doesn't
like,
matter.
I'm not gonna
to
have
them.
these crisps this day.
Yeah,
Because,
or like
yeah,
if I'm filling a form and are you going to be an organ donor is already pre-ticked. Okay, yeah, sure, fine. Because it's not a part of my identity. It's not a part of how I see the world. There's no cost in doing that. But yeah, the boiler one's a good one because then, are you okay with that? With like being cold for one day or whatever,
Yeah. And I mean, the literature like the literature on sort of environmental politics would suggest that like people aren't okay. like everyone's an environmentalist, and so you're asked to do something, and it's been years and years and years of showing that it's like a very low salient.
So everyone's an environmentalist, but does that result? Do they act that out not in their everyday lives because people don't want to do stuff which costs some money, but do they do that they try to vote for people who are environmentally? Is it correlated in that way at least?
No, because then it bites you
I mean,
back.
it doesn't
Yeah,
look
Then the politician will say, now you're going to pay, a tax.
expensive or something. Yeah.
And this is the idea of salience, right? So like it's a high salient issue would be my wallet. Like low salient issue would be the environment. If I just ask you, hey, do you care about the environment? You go, yeah. Can you give me $10 a day? And they go, no. Right? Or like, and it's the same thing with the politician, right? You say, I'm not going to vote for you because this is the issue that I care about the most. I care about all issues, but that's the one I care about the most. Yeah. So, but I think that's changing. I think the salience, like if we talk to the younger generation, like I feel like it's becoming a higher and higher salient issue, which is good, but. Yeah.
I was going to say a lot of times based on like the behaviour stuff as well is this thing of like it's your responsibility rather than it's the responsibility of fossil fuel companies. So groups like Just Stop Oil are basically saying enough with the consumer. I'll get my cardboard straw or whatever the thing is because it's actually just a tactic to just put the onus on the consumer. And so the thing to be political pressure on Rishi Sunak to not open up new oil fields and things like that.
Well, being able to get your energy in a way that's actually sustainable. Like, I mean, they're systemic, and it is a tactic. It's like a known tactic. Yeah.
Super complex, and I think quite a lot of this research is just trying to show like the truth of the communication sphere, of, like what's actually happening there. That's the truth we're trying to find.
But it is all targeted towards what we can do about it. Like, and it's just that our team is not we are, like SAF is, and like we're doing it on different communication stuff, but in this misinformation space. If John was here, who's our co-author, like that's his whole thing, that's what he focuses on,
And it's about working with NGOs and working with media and other kind of external companies to like develop apps and to develop things to allow them to do stuff.
Regarding the times, like you said, that most of the claims are very stable, but I think that there's probably few claims that are seasonal, like
for sure. It's cold.
So
or it's hot. Yeah, absolutely.
Like
If you look on social media now, COP is hypocrisy season, where they all travel in their private jets and their
It's exactly
15-car convoys. So it always comes up every year now.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, totally seasonal. Like, so if you were modeling this, over a year.
What more than seasonal is conditional on things. So the arguments are conditioned on something.
Fine, in this case, but it could be on something else as well. Yeah, it's conditioned on I'm in the Senate, not on Twitter. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you.